most part, this video is more or less tailored towards young men like myself, you know, who are young men looking to become a greater man and perhaps deal with some confusion of how to approach your journey, or maybe you're looking for some clarification, or perhaps just some input to better shape your ideal of what it means to be a great man. Now, first of all, I think the first thing is you should define what it means to be a great man. Because how are you going to become a great man if you don't know what that is? And I think I could tell you what it, for me, means to be a great man. But I think for every man it's a little bit different. So you kind of want to be like say you know, men reach their peak when they're like 40 or 50. When I'd say when they're like 50, that's when they really have like accumulated, like if they make good choices throughout their life, that's when they've accumulated wealth and you know, resources, and they have their life figured out and things like that by the age of like 50. So you got to look at yourself at like 40 or 50, like who do I want to be? What type of man do you want to be? Or maybe you're thinking more longer term. Well, I think you should think like long term. First and foremost, you should think to the end. You should think of the end, the finish line, and be like, okay, what man do I want to be like after I die? What do I want people to remember about me? What do I want? Like, if someone told the story about my life, what would I want the story to be? Like, what would I want, you know, to be feeling? What would I want to fill the pages of my autobiography? You know, so think all the way to the end, and then you break it down. You know, say like you want to be a very rich man, or you want to have a big family, or you want to be a spiritual person. When you're like, whatever your end zone is, your end game, and then break it down into phases. Like, okay, what do I need to become that? That's how you think strategically. First, you must identify the end goal. You must identify and conceptualize the end goal. So, okay, the end goal is to become a great man. Now, what does that mean to me? You break that down. Okay, that's step one. And then step two is to break it down into phases. So I've picked up a tip from other people, and I think it's a good idea. It's like you break it down into decades. So it's like, where do I want to be in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years? You know, you want to break it down per decade. And it's like, who do I want to be every single decade? And say like right now you're like maybe 20 something, or maybe you're younger, whatever the case may be, maybe you're 30 something, whatever. You say, by the time, let's say I was 30, if I was 30, maybe I would say by the time I'm 40, I want to have a successful business. Okay, cool. 10 years to build a successful business. That's a realistic goal. Now, if you want to say like, well, I want a successful business within the next like 6 months, that's unrealistic. Like, it could happen, but you're not really going to be able to sustain something long term because you haven't taken the time to really acquire both the skills and the experience needed to maintain that level of responsibility, that level of pressure, and to be able to make those types of big decisions under pressure. So it's really like if you really just get lucky, it's more of a curse than it is a blessing, because it's just gonna mess everything up, you know. And it's gonna be harder because now you've had a taste of success, and you're gonna set a false expectation that every time you start a business it's gonna be the exact same way. So it's better to play the long term and secure the win rather than try to gamble and be like, let me roll this dice, and it could either go really well or really bad. It's better to play the long game, think step by step. So once you've identified that, like, you've broken it down into decades, and you've identified the goal that you want for the next decade, you try to identify like 3 or 4 different decades, whatever. You have it planned out, and you try to build a bridge from one to the other. Like, let's say I wanted to build a business. Okay, I'm a young man. Let's say I'm thinking I want to build a business, but in order to build a business, I want to develop leadership. So before I build a business, I first want to join the military. Let's say that I want to have a career in the military. And I say, okay, I go into the military, I serve, I learn how to be a good leader, I learn how to be a good follower, I learn, perhaps the power dynamics or whatever. And then once I get out of the military, I'm gonna use those skills in order to be more efficient in business. So it's like every single thing, you should find a way to bridge a gap between the two things. Like, find something that's gonna help you lead on to the next thing. That's how I think you should structure it. So you might think like your end goal is to be some kind of like super big into philanthropy, some kind of medical thing. But you might think like, okay, my first goal should be for this next decade, I should focus on being an apprentice to a greater doctor. I learn the tips and the tricks of the trade. I learn whatever I can. And I undergo an apprenticeship, and I learn these things. And with those skills, I'm going to be able to branch off and do my own thing. So let's say that decade you want to learn medicine. The next decade after that, you want to own some kind of medicine store, some kind of supplements, like brand, whatever. And so like the first decade, like you create a bridge to lead you into the second decade. Okay, first decade, I'm going to learn about the human body. I'm going to learn about what's good for it, what's not. The second decade, I'm going to use all the things that I've learned in that first decade, and I'm going to put it into something tangible where it can, like, you have to think long term like this. And you should be able to bridge the gap between every single like phase, and every single phase should lead on to the next phase. So I think that's like the second step, I believe I said, or I don't know what step we're on. So first, define what it means to be a great man, okay? So basically define your goal, end goal. Second, break it down into phases. First, second, third. It doesn't have to be very small phases. It should be big phases. Like I prefer decades, because we're playing chess, not checkers, so we gotta think long term. So break it down into phases. And then third, you want to find a way to link all of those. Okay, you want to find a way to link all of those. And I think it wouldn't be a bad idea to have contingency plans as well. So what do I mean by contingency plans? Hey, if this doesn't work out, guess what? I have something else to fall back on. Now, this is arguable. I would say contingency plans are optional, but it's not a bad option to have. Because if you guys are familiar, with Sun Tzu, or with, 33 Strategies of War by Robert Greene, they talk about the death ground strategy, where when your back is against the river, or, nowadays we say when your back is against the wall, but you have the strength of like 10 men, so it puts you in a different state of mind. But what I'm saying is, like, whether you choose to have a contingency plan or not, it shouldn't be left up to chance. It should be calculated. You should say, if you don't want to have a contingency plan, you should say, I'm not going to have a contingency plan because I'm going to use the death ground strategy. So it should be calculated. Now, if you do have a contingency plan, it should be like, okay, well, I have too much to lose, so I can't afford to use the death ground strategy. I'm already a little more mature, or whatever the case may be. Like, I have a family, I can't afford to be taking unnecessary risks like this. So I'm gonna have contingency plans to fall back on, and then to, try again. But what I'm saying is all of that should be calculated. So figure out your contingency plans, whether you're gonna have them, whether you're not, how many of them you're gonna have. Like, obviously you don't gotta go A to Z, but you should be ready for anything. You guys know what they say, stay ready so you don't have to get ready. Or another one is, the more you sweat in times of peace, the less you bleed in times of war. You should always be ready for anything, even if you don't have a necessarily contingency plan for every single possible, situation. Like, that's impossible, because there's certain things that you can't factor in. But you should still be ready for anything that comes. You should be ready in the sense that you know how to deal with it, because you've been in other stressful situations. You planned, and you kind of know like where you're headed. So your basis of decision making is, does this contribute to the process? If yes, then I will do it. If no, then I won't, or whatever. But that should be the basis of your decision making. Does this contribute to the process in the long term? You have to think long term. And that things get difficult in that sense, because like, you might get to a point where you have to say, this relationship with this person, friendship, intimate relationship, whatever it is, I have to choose between them and say work. And so you might be like, well, you might think like, oh, I should choose work. But you should also be smart, because what if in the long term one of your goals is to have a big family, to have a good family, and have good relationships? But you also want to be able to take care of those people. So work is also important, and so are the relationships. So what do you choose in that scenario? You compromise other things that you don't care so much about. Like, that's what you have to figure these things out. So things aren't always as black and white as they seem as. Like, does this contribute to my process? Yes or no? Sometimes they are, and when they are black and white, it's pretty easy to make those decisions. The problem is when you get into the gray area. When you get into the gray area, that just means there's more factors involved. There's more things you have to think about, you have to process. But at the same time, there is a way. Like, there are other things that you're prioritizing that can be, put on the back burner in order to prioritize these things that are important to you. Like, as far as the relationship goes, I can't give relationship advice. Like, I'm really bad with relationships. But that's why I mentioned that, because like, I've had that dilemma myself, and looking back now, I see that, like, learning from my own mistakes, like, I didn't have to choose between work and a relationship. I could have had like both if I would have been a better man, if I would have been a more capable man. But because of my incompetence, I felt as though I couldn't do both. And so of course I chose work, like, of course, And so, do I regret it? Absolutely not. Why? Because I've learned from my mistakes, and I see that there's other things that I could have put on the back burner in order to continue relationships with, family members, intimate partners, etc., etc. So, but that's the important thing, is you have to, like, not everything is black and white when it comes to decision making. Black and white decisions, those are the easiest ones to make, because it's either yes or no, and it's either, does this contribute to the process or does it not? But when it gets into the gray area, that's where you really have to factor in, like, how is this decision gonna look for me in 20, 30 years, things like that. And that's what a capable man can do. That's what a great man can do. I think it's foolish, because this whole game, this whole life is like, life is one large game of chess. Like, if we're being honest, it's one large game of chess. And it's like everyone is playing their cards. It's all strategy. Everyone's moving But like the man who can't strategize and can't plan efficiently and properly, he's gonna get left behind, you know? And that would be absolutely unfortunate if you failed because of your incompetence, simply because you couldn't handle your shit. You don't want to be that man. You know, you don't want to be that man. So I think, like, for now, that would be like the first 3 steps. I think I could probably make another video later on, maybe a part 2 of like more things, but for now I think that's good. But you guys think about that. I think that's like figure that out first, and then we can move on to the next part. Because, you know, I can't give you the whole pizza. I gotta give you half first, you know. But yeah, that's it for now. Y'all take care.